President of the European Parliament, Mr. Schulz, I want to thank you for speaking about yourself. Former President Buzek, thank you for your message. Former President Pottering. Dr. Moshe Kantor, I want to recognize your efforts and the efforts of your colleagues on behalf of this very important memorial ceremony. Thank you. Justice Gabriel Bach, Commissioners, Commissioner Georgieva, Commissioner Andor, Israeli ambassadors, Ambassador to the European Union, Ambassador Adas, Ambassador to Belgium, Ambassador Revach, members of the European Parliament, ambassadors, distinguished rabbis and leaders of Jewish organizations, and first and foremost, Holocaust survivors. Without you, I think we wouldn't be here today at this ceremony. 70 years and 4 days ago, the meeting that later will be known as Wannsee Conference convened in a quiet suburb of Berlin. In less than an hour and a half, 15 efficient Nazi officials sealed the fate of millions of Jews trapped in the occupied Europe. Today, we mark the horrible results of this quiet and efficient effort. Today, we look around us for proof that such catastrophe will not happen again. Before the Wannsee Conference made the extermination of Jews inevitable, there were other conferences. The civilized world had time to prevent the Nazi regime from acting on its explicit promises to remove the Jewish influence. The train to Auschwitz was slow at first. It passed many critical stations where it could be derailed, stopped, delayed. Yet time after time, those in charge, those responsible, were all too happy to wave this train of death through. There was the Evian Conference, where 31 European nations debated the fate of the Jewish refugees from Germany and Austria. Despite the pleas of Jewish organizations and the presence of international press, the conference achieved nothing. The great Western democracies made token gestures. Most claimed they had enough Jews already. There was the Munich Conference, where, in a futile quest for elusive peace, two leading Western democracies delivered to Hitler new instruments for future aggression. In the frenzy of humiliation and dismemberment of Czechoslovakia, no thought was given to the fate of hundreds of thousands of Jews of that country. No guarantees requested. There was the St. James Conference in London. In May 1939, Britain approved the White Paper, curtailed the Jewish immigration to Palestine, and shut the door on the last real option of rescue. At the time, the editorial in Manchester Guardian called the decision, and I quote, a death sentence on tens of thousands of Jews. How widely optimistic that was. How naive. This criminal indifference to the Jewish plight was not accidental. It was nurtured by the years and years of anti-Semitic propaganda, sometimes crude and obnoxious, sometimes masquerading as social and biological science. Before the Jew Zeus, there was the Jew Dreyfus. Before the camps, there were the protocols. And yet decades later, we have the story about IDF soldiers harvesting organs in Haiti. Today, as in the past, the purpose of the anti-Semites is the same: to deny the common humanity of the Jew, to single him out, to scapegoat him. 70 years ago, this worked perfectly. When the train of extermination of the Jews of Europe arrived in Wannsee, The participants in the murderous conspiracy had all the reasons to assume that their dedicated work will be tolerated by their subjects and ignored by their enemies. Looking back at their fate, it's hard not to agree. Of the 15 participants in the conference, only 2 were sentenced to death for their part in the biggest industrial mass murder in human history. One of them, Adolf Eichmann, was brought to justice by the Jewish state. Today we know that for years, at least America and Germany knew where he was and did nothing. 6 of the Wannsee participants escaped punishment altogether and died in their beds in the New Germany. They were not alone. In the first years after the war, American High Commissioner for Germany, John McCloy, has set free thousands of Nazi criminals. This was the same McCloy who just a few years earlier rejected the desperate requests to bomb the death camps and railways feeding them because, and I quote again, positive destruction of the camps would require precision, while the bombing itself would have the most uncertain, if not dangerous, effect on the object to be achieved. It is hard to read this and not to hear the voices of today, voices of those who look at the radical Islamists racing for the possession of nuclear weapon and preach restraint, those who listen to the open promises of Tehran to eliminate the Jewish state and demand respect for the Iranian interests, those who receive overwhelming evidence about the true nature of the Iranian nuclear program and the regime behind it, and blame Israel for the attempt to defend itself. Today, as the snow sets for the 70th time on the killing fields of Europe, where each garden, each meadow, each plowed furrow are fertilized by the ashes of my people, I come here in the name of my government, of the independent Jewish nation, to assure our friends, to make a promise to our enemies, and to warn the indifferent. When we say never again, we mean it. We will not wait for another conference with bated breath and forlorn hope. We will not beg for compassion and sympathy. We will not be made to live with constant threat of another Holocaust. We hope that this hour never comes. We hope that the civilized world has learned the bloody lessons of appeasement. We hope that the moral majority of humanity will rise above the selfish calculations of profit and loss, the petty politics, and the cowardice masked as cautiousness. We hope that any threat to civilization will be defeated by force of universal moral fury and sustained pressure, not by bombs and bloodshed. Today, as we come together to remember the millions of victims of Nazi barbarity and of the world's indifference, I ask you to help us to keep this hope alive and to make it true. Let us all, Jews, Christians, Muslims, take a stand together against tyranny and barbarism. Let us destroy them before they'll swell with power, fed by the wealth of their lands and the blood of their victims. Let us deny them, in the words of Winston Churchill, those lights of perverted science with which they plan to unleash a new dark age, first on their own captive peoples and then on the rest of the world. Let us say to them, from here, we remember, we are vigilant, we are determined, we are united. We say to them together, never again.